So, hi everyone, good morning, and thank you for joining the webinar today. So, the webinar title that we will be holding is about the tips for managing your data efficiently this year 2020. So, the webinar topic will be covered in some two-part series. Today, the webinar will held by our director, technical director of MRDC Software, Mr. Phil Hearn, and he will be outlining the important data analysis and reporting issues. And we have the second part of webinar, which will be held on, I think, next week. And that webinar will show a live example and highlights areas that will affect productivity, profitability, and efficiency that provides the deliverables. So I'll give you like a takeaways for this webinar. First is consideration in changing market research landscape. Second is tips, tricks, and pitfalls. And third is how to manage data efficiently. So my name again is Nikki Sunga. I'm the sales executive of MRDC Software, and I will be hosting this webinar. And at the end of this webinar is you can ask questions in mind. There will be a box below in your Zoom, the Q&A. You can ask question there, and we will answer it at the end of the webinar. So I will take handle with our technical director, Mr. Phil Hearn. Phil?
Thanks, Nikki. Well, thank you for joining me today. I never know whether to say good morning or good afternoon to people on these webinars, because I know we've got people both in Europe and in Asia joining us today. So if it's the end of your day, well, I hope you had a good day, and good afternoon to you. If it's the beginning of your day, I hope it's a good one. It's very wet here, but hopefully you're going to have a good day. The idea for this webinar sort of came out of a number of blog articles that I've written, which have talked about software that's in the market research industry, either tools that do specific things or tools that perhaps are more general purpose, that take you right through from collecting data through to delivering perhaps a dashboard or something like that. And I've talked on different themes within what I'm going to talk about today in those blog articles, and I will give you the link for the blog articles at the end, because you might want to read up a bit more than some of the things I'm going to perhaps do in only sort of very basic detail in this webinar today, as we only keeping this to sort of a very short session. One of the things I'm going to be talking about is, I'll use the word hub, that we're very much used to things becoming more in hubs these days. And I talk about perhaps our personal life, where we're used, our phone is a hub these days, where, I don't know, if you're ordering tickets for things, you'll do it on your phone. If you want a taxi, you'll do it on your phone. If you perhaps want to order food, you do it on your phone. If you want to see how good or bad your bank balance is, you do it on your phone. And your phone has become a hub. And there's a tendency to, I think I've read this, where all B2C and B2B are very different, or it's not the same when it's B2B. I think there's also an equal argument that B2B and B2C are actually quite similar, in that more and more people want their data in a hub or in one place where they can access it all. And I think this is something that market research is growing into, but I would like to see accelerate and improve the way that it can deliver data to end clients. I know one of the things that sort of makes me sort of think that, perhaps, albeit as a consumer, as we're called, is that recently for a family event, I was sort of given the task of booking a restaurant, and I think there were 3 suggestions that we looked at, and I went online and went to book one of these, and I found that one of them I couldn't book online. It just gave me a link to a phone number. Now, that very small inconsideration, if you like, the fact that I couldn't just connect and book a restaurant on a particular date at a certain time for a particular party size, meant I didn't bother using that restaurant, because it was too much effort for me to pick up my phone and make that call and book the restaurant, even though it gave me a link to make it ring immediately if I wanted to. Now, you could say I'm just a lazy person if you want, and I can't be bothered to make a phone call. But the reality is that we all perhaps unconsciously do this. Unless things are convenient for us now and things are all in one place, we might not make that effort. Or a client or you as a research agency might lose business if that connection is not as smooth as perhaps somebody would want it. So again, I would argue B2C and B2B are actually quite similar. If we sort of talk, I'm hoping my slide would click on, and it's refusing to click on. Don't know why that is. Now it's clicking on. If we look at sort of surveys in the past, they were very much field work. We used to clean the data, produce some tabs, and then perhaps provide to the client a Word or a PowerPoint report and probably a presentation as well. I would call this sort of very straight line sort of market research. This is what we have done in the past. It's very straight line. And indeed, still some market research is this very straight line research. Collect the data, clean it, although that's less necessary these days, as it's often collected online, produce some tables, put it into a report, maybe a dashboard, maybe a presentation, but a very straight line process. And straight lines tend to cut across hubs. If I sort of think of a hub as being something that's a circle, lines go straight through circles and come out the other side. And perhaps that's a way of thinking it, but sometimes that we've got to change the way we work. And I would argue now that data has become more complex. And that's not more difficult, that's different from more complex. I think it's become actually less difficult in some ways because surveys tend, but not always, tend to be a little bit smaller these days because they're online. And the questions tend to be more straightforward. But what is more complicated is that there's different sources of data now. There's a lot of talk about big data, and I'm not going to go into that in any great depth, but I think there's a growing need now for buyers of research to want other data alongside their survey data. And that might be sales data, KPIs, any other sort of external data that's nothing to do with the survey, but they want to see alongside their survey data. Or indeed, as we're increasingly seeing, people want to put data from more than one survey into their reports or dashboards. So I think there's a growing need to be able to handle data effectively because data is becoming more complex, not more difficult, but more complex. So I think there's a trend that also that clients want access to their data. And that's not everybody, but we are used to sharing data these days. So it's the norm now that you can get your hands on your data. And that starts with us, if you like, as consumers on our phones. As I said at the beginning, we expect now to be able to access any information we want. And it should be just a button press or two away from what we want to see. And that means that buyers of research are, in many cases, not always, some want to keep well away from their raw data or their actual survey data, but they might want to be closer to their data so that they can explore it. And they might want to explore it in sort of two different ways, I guess. That I differentiate between analysis and dashboards. Analysis are tools where perhaps you can do another tabulation, for example, and then put that into a chart. So you're giving someone, if you like, access to all or most of the data within a survey, so that they can produce new analyses that have perhaps not been provided to date, so they can dig into it in more depth, or perhaps they can filter it on a subsample or a target market group that's within their data so that they can see more depth to the sort of basic analysis that might be provided because there's something of interest that's coming up in the data. So analysis sort of lets people do things, I won't quite say to any depth, but to a fairly unrestricted depth, whereas dashboards are somewhat different in that they are usually quite confined. Now, again, it is possible to have a dashboard system. There are dashboard systems where you can put all the questions in there so that you can do both analysis and dashboard. So they're not mutually exclusive. They do overlap in some cases, but not always. Some dashboards are very confined and controlled so that people can only do so much within that dashboard. It will be typically a subset of the data that can be explored to a certain depth within certain provided criteria. And dashboards work well when you know what the users want to do with it, or you have a good idea, or you're highly confident what the users want to do with it. They become somewhat more complex or perhaps sometimes ineffective where you have a really wide range of users, and perhaps the person who's providing the dashboard or your client doesn't actually know what the users want to do with it, or hasn't perhaps asked what the users want to do with it. That becomes more complicated then. Yes, it's possible to produce dashboards of different levels so that perhaps the CEO can just see the headline figures if that's all he wants to see, whereas people who are working in various operations want to see a bit more depth to the data. There's also a move to link survey data to CRM systems. Now that tends to be the customer feedback market, and the customer feedback market and the traditional market research market, in some ways they're perhaps separate from each other, but also they're getting closer and they overlap more and more. So there is a need for some survey data to be fed back to CRM systems in some cases, but that's not perhaps something that's really taken off just yet. Perhaps what's more important, that there's a need or a growing need to link survey data to business reporting systems. And there's some big business intelligence software packages out there now that many of the big companies in the world use, and they will want to get their survey data in there, but sometimes that's quite difficult because survey data is a little bit different from most other business data. Survey data tends to be a small number of records with lots of fields, whereas most other business data is the other way around. If you think about it, it's thousands of records with a small number of fields, and the two don't fit together particularly well in many cases. But there's still that growing need to get survey data into the reporting systems that companies use so that it's accessible with their other business data, such as sales, targets, and other things that we talked about earlier, I talked about earlier. So the result of this is that the data is not often conceptually more complex, but the routes that you need to take as a research provider become more varied. It's not a straight line anymore. The lines are more blurred, and I think that what clients expect is changing and will continue to change, and their expectations are growing. Again, because we can do so many things on our phones, the expectation is there. I think that people should be able to do more with their survey data, and I think this means that the market research world has got to keep improving what it provides and linking into the rest of the world's business data. And I think that means that data must be mobile. So by that, I mean that it's possible to transfer your survey data wherever you want it so that it can be available wherever the client wants it. So the traditional ways of moving data around within market research have been using ASCII data. For those of us who are as old as me will remember binary data as well, probably younger still. CSV data is a common way of moving data about, it still is. SSS is a format which is stores the data actually and the raw data in an ASCII file, but then has a map of that data with all the text and all the variables and all the questions in your surveys held in an XML format. SSS has been around now for, I think it started about 1990, 1991. It's been improved a fair amount in that time, but it's a convenient way of transferring survey data. And SPSS has become, if you like, a sort of standard within the industry that many people adopted for a way of storing survey data, because within one file, everything is held in there. That's the data and the text and so on, and the variable definitions for each of the variables in that particular survey. So it's a convenient way of doing it, but it is proprietary. All of these tools really are for internal market research needs, if you like. they all mean that you can move data from one survey platform to another. The current trends, and there are some new kids on the block, as it were, here, are that yes, SPSS is becoming is still quite a standard, and as I look at the increasing number of data collection platforms coming on the market, SPSS now I think is overtaking SSS as a standard way of moving data from one system to another. SSS is still there, but I feel that it's starting to fade a little bit. XML is another way of moving data between your system and other systems. SQL databases, some online packages now have links to so that you can have the credentials to log in and transfer certain data to databases. SAPI is the sort of one of the new ones that's coming up, and I will talk about that a little bit while I'm here now, in that SAPI is an API, which means that one system can connect to another automatically, and if you like, suck in that data into the system. And that's something that's growing. It's in its early days, but it's growing as a way of moving data, and fits in very well with the concept of a hub, so that you can run your survey, you can put it into a repository, give someone the login details to access that, and obviously passwords and so on, and then somebody can read that straight into their system. Now, there's some good things with that, but there's some weakness with that. The problem with that is that we need adoption, or the market research industry needs adoption of SAPI as a way of transferring data to business information systems effectively, because at the moment it's really a bit like an upgraded SSS, because I think only a handful of market research agencies, or sorry, market research software systems have adopted it, and it's actually still being developed. So it is very much in its infancy, but I see it as an opportunity for the future. And of course, there's other APIs that have been developed to link one piece of software to another, or one system to another. The problems with the systems we looked at so far is that they tend to be internal to market research, and they're not business wide. And I think this is one of the challenges that I think there's a need to market things. If SAPI becomes a good way and a satisfactory standard, there's a need to market SAPI to the wider business community, so that data can be transferred easily from survey data into other platforms that banks and so on use for their own analysis and reporting. And that's something I think that will need a market to get that off the ground. It will need a marketing budget to do that, and I'm hoping big research agencies respond to that and put some money into SAPI, so that it's something that can be pushed and accepted as a way of transferring data into other platforms. So what about surveys? What's happened to them? Well, we've already discussed this briefly, but just to sort of recap on that they're mainly online, as we all know now, surveys, or they're moving that way very quickly. They're faster, shorter, and simpler in many cases. Again, I'm sure there's some people sitting in the audience here now saying, I just had a horrible survey I had to do online. But generally, they've become faster, shorter, and simpler. But that doesn't make the data management easier, because there are a real huge number of platforms that are coming out on the market now, and some of them, or many of them, I see joining the market now, are really sort of specialists for consumer feedback, where it's that typical question, you know, would you rate this service or product to a friend or relative and give it a score out of 10, where it's leading to NPS scores and the like. So many of the platforms do that, but of course then there's a whole range that go right through to be able to do a bit more than that and do a bit of market research, through to those that can do market research, and through those that are complete systems. So they do range from sort of fairly basic systems that are good at getting customer feedback, right through now to quite sophisticated systems. And of course, they come with different price tickets as well. So I want to talk quickly. I've written a whole blog article on this, but I just picked out some points from this, that there's a difference, if you like. I see a splitting, and again, it's not as simple as a total split, because it will always be a range of projects out there. But surveys are moving from simple to, if you like, traditional, if that's the word I can use. And the simple surveys, increasingly, there's a need to automate them so that as soon as the data is collected, tabulations are produced, charts are produced, a dashboard's produced, and someone can hook in and look at that data and play with it and browse it. I would say seconds after the survey is finished, but perhaps not literally, but very quickly after the survey has closed. So there is a move that simple surveys are automated in some way. But other surveys will need more advanced tools than that, typically, in that you need tools to manage that data, to derive more complex variables, for example. So it's okay collecting perhaps a numeric value, but then putting that into some ranges possibly needs a variable that's generated after the survey data has been collected, because the ranges might not be obvious that you want to put them in, and that might be more convenient for analysis to put them into ranges. Or you might just want to define some more complex variables that put information from 2 or 3 variables, questions together into one variable. So there is more sort of need to do more work on the data after it's collected, particularly if you're using some of the more basic tools that specialize, if you like, in collecting data, but aren't really geared to doing much more with it after they've collected it than perhaps processing it on to the next stage. What I talked about, straight line processing at the beginning. And there's a need, I think, more increasingly to merge data more and more often now. I know users of our software are merging in other data with their survey data. Maybe that's data about the respondents that's on a database, particularly in customer feedback. That's true. You have people hold information about their customers. They want to merge with their survey data so they can use analysis. Or it might be completely external, non-survey data, such as the sort of things we talk about, KPIs, and where you're looking at targets, if you like, and things like that. But again, increasingly need to deliver that data into other systems. But it all leads back to that same thing, that data needs to be mobile, just as where I started at the beginning. So let's look at market research software. I mean, no doubt that it's getting better and better. There's a wider variety of products that are available now. And where it's getting better and better, I feel, is at doing simple things well. So that business, we used to sort of do a lot of work manually, if you like. Perhaps producing a PowerPoint presentation was something that was quite manual and slow. It wasn't, it was a regular thing to see people copying and pasting or even typing figures into a PowerPoint report. There's much more automation now so that we do the simple things well. And so getting from data to maybe a dashboard or to some perhaps PDF reports has got better. I don't think it's perfect, but it's got a lot better. But it leaves behind more complex things sometimes, because although we've got better as an industry at automating the simple things, I think we are leaving behind some of the more complex things. And if you look at the software, a lot of it, again, is geared to that efficiency of handling customer experience. It's a big market. I think that the platforms that are used do vary much more now, from just being very basic and perhaps doing a job well, but basic, right through now to advanced systems where you can plug other things into it, connect to other software, and that, I think, will increase and get better as time goes on. And of course, that's reflected in the price ranges, in that some software out there now, there's not much that's free anymore. There used to be some free software out there, It's become low cost now, although I've written articles about this, that some of the low cost software starts low until you start using it with a lot of users or a lot of surveys or start collecting a lot of records, and then they actually get more expensive than some of the, what I would consider superior platforms. So I think that's something to watch for, although a separate subject. But platforms generally do the simple things well. And I think the package solutions are great when they meet your needs, but they're inadequate when needs are more complex sometimes. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit now. And so I think what we're finding with a lot of our customers is that there's a move from having perhaps one software product that is your solution for processing your surveys and your data to having two or more. Again, I've written about this at length, and there's some pain in having two more products. It means, you know, besides that perhaps the manager has got more to worry about and the choosing of what to use, it means more learning. It means that you perhaps, if you've got one product, you get some benefits out of that, that you just only have that one to learn, and the training is easier. Everyone knows what to do, the best way of approaching a project, and if you like, the tips and tricks of getting around it, any problems. But you have clear goals and deliverables. And of course, it's cheaper. You're spending less on software. The problem with one product is it's a bit of a straitjacket in that if you want to do anything different and that software can't do it, or perhaps it can do it, but it's cumbersome to do, you start to have some disbenefits then. And it can mean there's a tendency to compromise, and perhaps you can't always quite give the client what they want. You're giving them perhaps second best. So, you know, I think this all sort of boils down to, if you like, flexibility. And I think, again, there's a growing need to be flexible. One size doesn't fit all, unless you're perhaps in a specific market where one size is what you're providing. And yeah, that can be a very good reason for doing it. And of course, the reverse of that, really, I've just crossed out the lines here, reverse this, that of course, if you have two or more products, yes, the disbenefits are you've got two things to learn or more things to learn. You can have too much choice. There's an area of management that has to come into it, choosing the best way of handling that project, getting the right people working on that project. You get stretched in that area. It's obviously more expensive, but of course, what you get, the benefits are there's more choice and you're more likely to meet your client's needs. So it really is something that's to be considered, and something, though, that I think we're seeing a real increase in that. I think perhaps at one point I felt threatened when I saw some of our clients buying other software products, but they used to see them as complementary to what we've got. And I think that's a perfectly good thing to do. So I think there's a number of data management problems that come from this at the moment. One of the ones I often talk about is tracking studies. I don't think market research often handles tracking studies very well. I've seen software suppliers claim that their software does tracking studies, and then I look at how cumbersome it is to do it. I think that, well, yes, you can handle tracking studies, but if someone's spending a day, perhaps that's not very efficient use of time to move to the next wave of a survey, when there should be tools in there automatically to do those sorts of things. Merging survey data with other data I've covered already. Generating complex variables. I think there's a need to be able to build complex variables, even, I wouldn't say in the simplest surveys, but on many other surveys. Making it easy to deliver data to other specialist systems, such as dashboards and so on. Some dashboard platforms are difficult to move data into, others are easy, but of course the products where you're doing your processing should be good at delivering data to those platforms. And we've already talked about moving data between platforms as things that we ought to be addressing. And I think the reason for raising these things is, and perhaps I find it's easy when running a business that some things, if they're a little bit more difficult in running a business, and this is nothing to do with data now, perhaps if they're inefficient, they might take you 10% or 20% longer. And the speed at which perhaps somebody who's really proficient and quite proficient can do something might be 10 to 20% different. But when it comes to data processing, the difference can be huge. So, I mean, I'll go back to tracking studies. A piece of software that isn't particularly suited to tracking studies, but can still just about handle them, could mean that staff are spending 3 or 4 times longer than they would in a program that's suited to that particular task. So we're not talking about just, someone perhaps wasting an hour of their time. We might be talking about something, a tracking study, if it's every month wasting perhaps, or spending 8 days rather than 2 days on a project, because that's the heartache or the extra work that goes into handling a tracking study in that software. And I've seen this with importing data. I know I've seen somebody who was using who switched to our software not long ago, who had to import some data from an online platform. The data was stored in SPSS format. That was the only format they could get out. It was an SPSS file. And what they were doing before to get it into their data was going through some elaborate process to read that data in, build lots of variables on top of it manually, because they had top 2 boxes, for example, and bottom 2 boxes for all the rating scales. And they had to go through each one of these one at a time. And the final straw came when the data was supplied wrongly 3 times, and they had to do this work 3 times. And what this meant was that someone spent about 3 days on a project just importing the data, when it should have been something that somebody could do in, I would say, an hour at the most. So those sorts of things are really important, because it's very easy in DP for things to take exponentially longer than they should do just because of some weakness in the software. And I won't name the platform, but I saw a demonstration of one of the biggest known platforms recently, who proudly announced that they could do target weighting in their software. And when I saw the demonstration of it, I was quite horrified that the way you did it was to have to download the data, do some manual calculations, feed the figures back in, upload the data, synchronize it, and then you could do your analysis. And the synchronization, it alone took, I think, 15 to 30 minutes you had to wait. I didn't find that even slightly practical. What if you're exploring doing some complex target weighting, and you wanted to perhaps have 3 or 4 goes at it? That would be half a day's work easily with that process. So, having the right tools to do these things, I think, is really important. So we're looking at software that does the right things. I think being able to move data is increasingly important. And by that, I mean both import and export. I always worry when I see when I pick up a new piece of software I haven't seen before, when I find it has about 10 imports, so it's easy to get data in, but no exports, or it grudgingly, it seems, lets you export a CSV file, which is perhaps not particularly useful. And I don't like those sorts of products, because I feel as though they're trying to trap me inside them. I don't like being trapped inside anything, let alone software. So you want software that's easy to get data in and out where you want it, and handles most common formats. If it gives access to specialist software, I think that's quite important, so that you can get data into the dashboard system that you might want to use, for example. And also to watch out for software that doesn't start getting quite expensive with add-ons. I've seen some products now that start quite cheap, but as you plug on extra bits, they end up being more expensive than a lot of other products that are out there. And I like to, this is always a difficult one, and I've talked about this in my blog articles quite a lot, about the difference between straightforward software to use that needs little training and software that needs highly skilled staff. And indeed, we sell products in both of those areas, and so understand the differences. You really want to be able to minimize the amount of work that highly skilled staff are needing, and so that less complex tasks can be handled by less trained staff, junior staff, and that they can help the more experienced staff, particularly at busy times. So you don't, although you want software for highly skilled staff often, less complex tasks should be achievable by less skilled people, and not be only in the hands of highly skilled people, which can happen. So flexibility and software that doesn't limit you really are perhaps the final things that really, I think, are worth focusing on. I think that technology is what market research is now. I know other people think otherwise, perhaps, or some people who've been in research a long while think that. But I think it's important with software to be effective and flexible and having the right tools, and to question your workflow. Which bits of your workflow don't go smoothly or take perhaps more time than you feel that they should? And if that's the case, it really is worth exploring, looking at getting the right products to fit what you're trying to achieve, and keeping in mind that clients' expectations are growing all the time. They're expecting you to be able to deliver data better every year. It's going to get higher and higher, that standard. So just a quick word. Today's very much been talking about the theory, if you like, behind data. At the next webinar, which is in 2 weeks' time, on the 16th of March, we'll be looking at a more practical example. I'll be using our own software for that. But it's not really intended as a sales demonstration particularly. Well, it's not. It'll be actually even highlighting some of the weaknesses of our own software. We'll be looking at the process of moving data about with a practical example, quite a simple one, but just looking at it. And I'll be discussing the issues that you might want to consider when you're moving that data about. So it won't be as much a demonstration of our software, but talking about and seeing data move through our software, but not really as a selling for our software, more really to talk about the issues that come up. So at that point, I'm going to take a pause. If Nikki has got any questions, I'll be glad to take them. So yes, Nikki, any questions on anything that's come up so far?
Yep. Okay. So thank you very much, Phil. I hope you all enjoyed this amazing presentation. Now, Phil will answer some questions that were sent to us during the presentation. So, okay. So the first question I have here, Phil, is you talk about having 2 products, but how do I choose which 2?
So you talk about tabulation products, do you say?
Yeah. You talk about having 2 products, but
having
how
two
do
products,
I choose
sorry.
which 2? Yep.
Okay. Oh, that's a big open-ended question. Yes. Okay. I deliberately avoided talking about naming any products, even our own, all the way through. I think I succeeded there. If I did mention our products once, it was a slip of the tongue. Yes, it's a good question. I can't just come out and say, well, you need this one, and then all your problems are solved. That would be very naive to suggest that. I think you've got to look at the business that you currently have, the business that perhaps you might be missing, and of course, what do you know that you're missing? But if you feel you're missing out on a different type of business, some certain types of business, and look at it as a business issue, and look at what you have now, and look at what things seem disproportionately difficult for you to do. So if you find, for example, that getting data into a dashboard and providing a dashboard to your clients is something that's problematic, is that the dashboard software that you're trying to use, or is it the software that is generating the data to go into that dashboard? Are they not a good match, or is it one program you're trying to use perhaps, and if it's an all-in-one package that's doing it all in one package, is it really better that you separate that and use that all in one package for one of those elements, but not the other, depending on which is satisfying your need and which is not. And what things are slow or actually prone to error as well. I know I've seen people in data processing are very imaginative, I find, and they find fantastic solutions to get around problems. That's what DP people traditionally have done and always do and still do. But that can be prone to error. Is there something that doesn't work smoothly, or perhaps you've delivered to your customer wrongly twice in the last 3 months, for example, even if it was even the slightest error. So looking at the flaws and the pain points in what you do, or the bottlenecks in what you do, and assessing that, and then looking at the products that fulfill those needs. But of course, if you are going to have two or more products doing things that overlap, or 3 products, they need to talk to each other. So again, avoid those products, in my mind, that are traps, that want to are great at getting your data in there, but then once you're in there, you're stuck. You want to be able to move your data on. So it really is like a business plan you need to put together and assess what you do and what you struggle with. And I can't be more specific than that, but I'd be delighted to talk to whoever sent the question, and listen to what they're doing at the moment, what their pain points are, and suggest, to the best of my knowledge, what the best route from that is. So hopefully that was helpful. I feel as I gave quite a long answer there and perhaps didn't give much advice, but hopefully it was useful.
Okay, thank you for that, Phil. I have another question here. The question is, how can I improve tracking studies when questionnaires change so much?
Yes, I certainly touched on tracking studies in there. I think tracking studies, there's a lot of software that claims to do tracking studies well, and they start right at these customer feedback programs, software programs that are good at doing that. But then when the going gets tough and the client says, well, can we just drop out this question and add this one in, or can we add an extra code here, and there's another brand here, and these 2 brands have merged together, it all starts to get very complicated. I don't think there are many software packages that handle complex tracking studies well. And I'm going to mention a product this time. I mean, our MRDCL software, our tabulation software, does have tools in it that let you manage the maps of your data, if I can call it that, and the changes to the structure of your questionnaire, so that everything can be merged together, and handled. Those differences can be handled all within one system, so that your analysis on the back and your data deliverables on the back, whether that's dashboards, putting it into SPSS, whatever it might be, is tidy. But yeah, there are problems. There's a big, if you've got a tracking study where nothing ever changes, there's a lot of software that can do that really well, or not much changes. But many software packages start to struggle with the slightest change, and I think you're right to identify that, but you need to find a product that handles it well.
Okay, so I have here another questions for you, Phil. The question is, if one was only interested in the charting and visualization software, which one would you consider?
If only interested in the charting and
visualization software.
Visualization. I don't feel qualified to answer that. I think there's a whole range of charting packages out there. There's ones like Tableau, which are sort of not particularly market research friendly, but have a lot of tools in there. There's programs like Displayer that are pretty good at giving you a fairly flexible system, sort of mid-range. I think I can't really answer that question, because I think if I go back to the first question that someone asked, it's a question of what works for you in terms of getting data into the charting system or the reporting system, dashboard system, sorry, and what is the level that you want to supply to your customers, and how sophisticated do you want that? How sophisticated do you want a dashboard that is fairly simple and fairly constrained in what people can do? Or do you want one where people can do pretty much anything, including analysis, as I talked about in one of the earlier slides, or one of the first slides? I think it depends on what you want, what you're trying to achieve, and how flexible you want to be. If you want to be able to do anything, you've probably got to go to one of the more expensive systems out there. But if it's limited, if you're mainly doing customer feedback type work, there's some very good solutions out there that do that, and give your clients all the tools they want. So again, I don't think there's one solution. Just as I would say with data collection, there's not one solution. It really depends on how flexible you want to be, or your clients want you to be.
Okay. And what is the difference between SSS and CHAPI?
Okay, I'll try and keep this a brief answer. SSS was a standard invented about 30 years ago, and it basically stores your survey raw data in an ASCII file, and all of the, if you like, instructions, or what's called the metadata that goes with that, the questions, the text, the type of questions they are, the responses, all of that is stored in an XML file. And it makes it easy, because I think there's about 50 or 60 software products within the market research industry that support SSS. It makes it easy to transfer your project from one system to another. So if you do it in product A and you want to do it next year in product B, if they're both SSS compliant, it should be easy to just go like that, and it will end up in the other software. I was going to say oven ready, but perhaps not quite oven ready, but more or less ready to start fielding or whatever it is you're going to do with it. SAP is a different concept. SAP is an API, which means that other systems can connect to it, and, if you like, take the data from that and suck that into the systems that they're that want to use them. And SAPI is, yes, it could be used within the market research industry to do the same thing as SSS, but the goal of SAPI, and it has got a way to go yet, in my opinion, is that it's our link from market research to the wider business world. So if we want to, just to explain how an API works, so for example, when you, let's say, book an airline ticket, when you book an airline ticket, you're dealing with the supplier of that airline ticket at that moment to make your booking on their system to book your flight, or wherever it is you're going to and from, whether that flight's available. You get a price. When you click the button to pay for it, that isn't the airline's app anymore. That's being connected to a bank, so that the bank can take those details, and an API is taking that data and transferring the relevant data, i.e. the amount that's got to be spent, to the bank, and the bank saying, yeah, I've got that money. It comes back, and then it's transferred back to the airline to say, yeah, they booked it, and you get your confirmation to say you booked that flight. Now, that's all done by an API, connecting, if you like, two systems together invisibly to you. So this is different from an app that you have on your phone, which apps generally have everything all in one place. So when you book a taxi, for example, you're dealing directly with the taxi company and pretty not much else. In fact, you do deal with the bank, don't you, as well on that? Bad example, sorry. But APIs are linking different things together, if you like, invisibly from the user. Now, SAPI, if it's marketed and the business information systems adopt the SAPI as a way of bringing data into their systems, this opens up market research to a much wider market and gives it great potential. So without going into any more depth than that, they're the differences. SSS I see as internal to market research to move survey about between survey products. SAPI really is that, but also more importantly, dealing with the outside world and supplying data to the outside world.
Doesn't Qualtrics do everything in one package?
I'm not sure how to answer. Yes, it is one package. If it does everything you want, yes, it does everything in one package. If it focuses a bit more on the customer feedback end of the market, and so it will not do things that some of the more sophisticated systems do for analysis and generating variables and so on. So if you wanted to do more than what Qualtrics does, you would need another piece of software, and it wouldn't be doing everything in one package. But Qualtrics is certainly sold as a package solution, and to the best of my knowledge, I'm not an expert in Qualtrics. It does data collection, it does analysis, it does dashboards and so on. So it's sold as an all-in-one system. So yes, but it might be limiting you because it won't do everything that everything can do. So to put that into context, there's certainly some things that MRDCL, our tabulation software, can do that Qualtrics certainly can't do. Whether it handles tracking studies well, for example, I just don't know. I don't have the knowledge of Qualtrics. There may be others who have more knowledge than me on that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I have here one last question for you, Phil. Yeah. So the question is, our clients want dashboard and analysis software. What do you recommend?
I'm going to duck that question. I've sort of covered it already, because the way I've answered it before was it depends, and I think I'll just answer it depends there, because I have sort of answered it before. Not a great highlight way to go out, I'm afraid, saying it depends. I think it depends what your clients are expecting, what you want to provide, and whether you want an all-in-one package that gives a limited but perhaps enough solution, or you want more. I'd need to, again, please drop me an email and I'll be more than happy to share any knowledge I have. I don't think there's a simple answer to that. There's not a one trite answer that says, well, this is what you want.
Okay, so that's the last question I have for you, Phil, for now. So again, thank you again, Phil, for answering those questions and for the great presentation. So everyone, the second webinar will be held on Wednesday, the 16th of March at 9 a.m. UK time. It will be focused on Phil showing a live example and highlighting areas that affect productivity, profitability, and efficiently provide deliverables. So it was a pleasure to have you all with us today. And this includes the webinar as well. Thank you all for attending, and we hope you have learned and enjoyed this presentation. Do you have something to say, Phil?
Yeah, just to say there, on this last slide here, we have quite a lot of blog articles that cover some of the things I've talked about today in a lot more depth. So please take a look at those. You'll see ones on the MRDC software website, and there's an MRDCL website which looks at more the high-end analysis, if you like, where there's a blog as well, and you'll find some things there. And I've talked about SAPI a couple of times today, and although it's in its infancy, I think it's something everyone ought to have a look at. So I've left that web address there on the slide. But I think, Nikki, you'll be distributing these PowerPoint slides anyway in the next day or so. So yes, if you haven't got time to note it down now, you'll get these slides in the next couple of days.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Phil, for your time. See you on Wednesday.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.